our habits of mind early, and maybe because I spent my teenage years trying to get out of Toledo, I live in the future. On my 75th birthday, for instance, a reporter asked me what I was most proud of in my life that I had done. And I said, well, I haven't done it yet. And he said, in this life? So I want to end with a few future reasons why the deep thinkers of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study are going to be the source, why we need you as the source of transformative thought, why your unique advantage of making others see the world as if females mattered is exactly what we need. Indeed, if you keep to this original purpose, it could render all the other so-called tubs of Harvard, the business school, the law school, and yes, even the divinity school, a little boring. Why? Because Radcliffe will be dealing with causes, and all the rest will be dealing with effects. For instance, in economics, we can't plan effectively in this country because caregiving in the home, which is an indispensable 30% of all productive work in this nation, whether it's for elderly parents or children, and of course it's done 90% by women, but all of this work has no attributed value. It could be valued at replacement level, made tax deductible for those who pay taxes, and tax refundable for those below tax level, thus rewarding work and substituting for welfare. Such an attributed value for caregiving would make the national system of accounts reflect realities and would be exceeded only by attributing an economic value to the environment. Now this is a project for a deep thinker of the Institute. We need you. For instance, in law, generally speaking, the law punishes the invasion of private property more surely than the invasion of our bodies. That's because we have the residue of a system in which some people were property, and also because rape was called sex instead of violence. Both women and men have a need for laws against bodily invasion, but since females suffer it more, we're more likely to establish a new legal principle that might be called bodily integrity. It could also protect against involuntary testing, DNA theft, and dangers within the organ transplant system. We need a deep thinker. For instance, in religion, why does God, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or even Buddha, look like the ruling class? Why do we so rarely study cultures in which godliness resides in all living things? Why are religious structures so often built to resemble the body of a woman, with an outer entrance, an inner entrance, a central vaginal aisle, two curved ovarian structures on either side? Think about it. And in the middle, the altar where the miracle takes place, where priests, dressed in skirts, sprinkle imitation birth fluid over our heads, give us a new name, and say something like, "You were born of woman and therefore in sin, but if you obey the rules of the patriarchy, we men can give you everlasting life." I didn't make this up, you know. That's what Perhaps Henry breasted the early 19th century scholar of Egypt as the birthplace of monotheism, and we should remember that monotheism probably didn't exist for the first 95% of human history. Perhaps he was right when he said, quote, "Monotheism is but imperialism in religion," unquote. God was withdrawn from females and from nature in order to justify conquering females and nature. The plot thins. For instance, striving to diminish the violence we can no longer afford on this fragile spaceship Earth is clearly a subject for a very deep thinker. One can directly predict the violence in a country, in its foreign policy, in its degree of reliance on the military, by the normalization of violence in the home. As Olof Palme, former Chief of State of Sweden, said, gender roles are the deepest cause of violence, all violence other than that in direct self-defense. Thus, it is the deepest responsibility of every government in the world to humanize gender roles. Yet because family forms and child-rearing are so often feminine areas of study, and foreign policy and militarism are so often masculine fields, academia tends to divorce the cause from the effect. Radcliffe scholars can link them. Speaking of violence, we could continue the long journey towards untangling it from sexuality. As long as dominance and submission are sexualized, some men will be turned on by the helplessness of children. Only when mutuality, cooperation, and equality are sexualized will child abuse diminish and stop. But as I speak, the average age of entry into prostitution in this country is 13, and there are at least 3 million child prostitutes in India. We now know about sex trafficking, and that's important, but we must also know about